Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're just waiting for a few people to get on, giving everyone a chance. Hope everyone is good today. Just be another minute or so till everybody signs on. I see they're still coming in little by little. Yes. Just another minute here. Okay. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us. This is our monthly Ask the Chairman Anything webinar, and I'm Marcia Steinberg, and I'll be moderating today. Today, Ken's topic is implications of the war. And as usual, he'll take about 15 to 20 minutes and discuss his view on this. And then we'll go right into the audience Q&A. So please, we want to hear from you. Bring your questions. That's the whole point of this, for an interactive discussion. We're definitely looking forward to hearing what you want to hear about. We're going to go as long as you have questions, or we'll go till 5 o'clock. So at 5, we'll cut it off. If there are still questions, we'll get to you on the next round. Just a quick reminder for those of you that may be new to this format. If you're when you're ready to enter your questions, if you're on an iPad, you'll find a question mark that you can click on, and there'll be a box that you can enter your questions there. If you're on a computer, there'll be a slide out menu, and one of the options on that menu will be questions. Just click on that and you can enter your question there. All right, moving on. Our next Ask the Chairman Anything will be in April, on Thursday, April 7th at 4 p.m. Thursday, April 7th at 4 p.m. Also, we have our in-person seminars. The last one of this series is coming up on March 27th. It will be with David Wormser of the Middle East Advisor to VP Cheney. That is on March 27th. It's in Boca Raton. So if you're in Boca Raton or can be there on March 27th, we would love to see you in person. Please come join us. And as usual, moving right along, to start things off, we're going to have an audience poll. Okay. Did President Putin make a mistake to invade Ukraine? Yes or no? We'll give everyone a few seconds to answer. Let's see what you all think on this one here. We're almost all there. Anyone else? We have a unanimous 100% yes on this one. 100% yes. Next, we have one more. President Biden do a good job managing the pre-war process? Yes or no? Okay, we're chiming in. Almost all there. One or two more maybe. All right, we have a split. 88% of you say no, and 13% of you say yes. Okay. And with that, I'm going to pass you on to, good morning, Ken.
Good morning, great to see you. Great to see everybody. Thanks for your help, Marcia.
Okay.
So, as Marcia mentioned, I'm going to speak for about 15, 20 minutes and about the disaster in Ukraine. The first issue is, why did President Putin do it? So, not that I talk to him, but I do read what he says, and I listen to him on YouTube. So, trying to pretend that can look into his head, so to speak. Number one, he wanted to protect himself from NATO. He was very upset that NATO kept expanding eastward and assumed responsibility for virtually all of Eastern Europe, which had been part of the Soviet Union. It was offended and by that, even though NATO's a defensive organization, still, as he said in his discussions, NATO had weapons, missiles that could be nuclear tipped 5-10 minutes from Moscow, and he regarded that as unacceptable, which is understandable. He wanted to recreate as much of the Soviet Union as he could and as much of the Russian Empire as he could. Number 3, he's almost 70 years old. He obviously knows he's not going to live forever. He knows that whatever successor comes after him is not going to fix this, that he's the strongest leader Russia's going to have. And from his point of view, it was a historical opportunity to fix the injustices of the demise of the Soviet Union and demise of some of the Russian Empire of 100, 200 years ago. And number 4, I think he figured that he should do it before the November elections, when the Republicans theoretically take over the House and Senate, and there would be more pushback, political pushback from the United States at that time. So a second issue I wanted, now before we go to the second issue, which is why did he miscalculate? Or as I say to myself, why did Putin outsmart himself? Putin's a very smart person. Why did he make a historical blunder? But before we do that, Marcia, let's look at that European slide. We'll come back and look at the European slide later, but let's look at it now. Well, so we can look at things from Putin's point of view. So on this slide, this is the national security slide that I created for Europe. And notice on the map where Belarus and Ukraine are, and they're not that far from Moscow. So from his point of view, he wants strategic depth. He doesn't want NATO tanks running over the farmland into Moscow. Now, NATO doesn't have many tanks, and NATO, he shouldn't have been worried about NATO, but maybe he was just thinking in the future that NATO could get its act together someday in the future and pose a threat to Russia, and he didn't want some other future leader stuck with the problem. And I think he thought that he had a historical opportunity to bring Ukraine directly into the Russian orbit. And if you look geographically, Belarus and Ukraine had a lot of strategic depth for him. And he wanted to fix that. So now let's go to the second question of why the miscalculation. So Marcia, you can take that down. We'll come back to this slide later in the presentation. So why the miscalculation? So I thought of 7 issues that might have been going through his head. Number 1, the Biden administration is clearly incompetent, and he saw a historic opportunity to take advantage of that incompetence. Number 2, NATO's underfunded and divided. There's 27, almost 30 countries in it, and they operate by consensus. Any organization that has to get 30 countries to agree on something is going to be very slow, obviously, in terms of confronting any issue. And Germany has had historically had an extra special relationship with Russia, and they thought that they could count on Germany to make NATO non-functionable. Number 3, the U.S. had been energy dependent, but now is no longer energy independent, and therefore wouldn't want to see higher energy prices that could result from some warlike chaos. Europe is even more energy dependent, particularly on Russia for almost 40% of its natural gas. which could have risen to 50 or 60% with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Number 4, Putin had looked at America operating in Afghanistan and came to the conclusion that the US military is incompetent. Number 5, his generals probably exaggerated to him the capabilities of the Russian army. He probably thought he could take over Ukraine in 3 days. He publicly said that anyone who challenges the Russian army will see he will unleash a series of weapons not known to by man, roughly paraphrasing something he had mentioned. In other words, trying to scare the Ukrainian government and people to not even think about challenging Russia. Number 6, he assumed Ukraine would surrender, and he underestimated President Zelensky. He probably just thought he was a comedian actor pretending to be president. He ended up being one hell of a president. And he expected sanctions, but didn't expect unusually severe sanctions unusually fast. Basically, within a week, his banks were largely eliminated from international commerce. And economists are forecasting that the Russian economy will fall 8% over the next 12 months. It can easily fall 10%, and it can fall another 10 and another 10. So Russia's in a big economic mess right now, and I think if he understood the enormity of the mess that would result, he would have rethought his idea, his logical idea from his point of view, to take over the Ukraine. Now, let's go to another thought that he would have had. Let me just change this paper from my screen. He probably said to himself, well, what if I'm wrong? What if, what could go wrong? Like anyone who plans something like this, you always have to plan on what would you do if things go wrong. He probably said to himself, well, maybe instead of 3 days, it'll take 1 week. He didn't know it was going to take 2 or 3 weeks, and then there'll be another 2 or 3 weeks, and maybe another 2 or 3 weeks. He didn't know he would get bogged down in Ukraine. And the negative publicity nowadays is very harmful to the country and to him as his image. Number 2, he probably said, well, if there is some extra turmoil, energy prices will go up. Well, that's good for me. I produce 10 million barrels of oil a year. I'm the number 3 largest producer in the world. So if energy prices go up, prices will basically finance my whole campaign. Number 3, Russia also has some important metals like palladium, platinum, and others, gold. And they also make fertilizer, a lot of fertilizer. So he probably said to himself, well, those prices will go up too, and that's good for me too. And number 4, a final thought, he probably said to himself, well, if there are sanctions and they become extra severe, I'll team up with my friends, the Chinese. We'll create an alternative to the SWIFT system. We'll have an alternative to the dollar. And between me and China and various other countries in our new Russia-China orbit, so to speak, we can serve half the world and let America and its allies serve the other half, and I can live without the dollars. So those are probably thoughts that he also had in his mind. Obviously, energy prices did go up and did help him tremendously, but the problem is if your money is frozen in American and European banks, it doesn't help you to be extra rich if you can't have access to those assets. So putting it all together, I think it was one of the largest strategic errors ever made by a leader in the history of leaders, in the history of countries, in the history of the world. It will rival Hitler's going into Russia in the winter, Napoleon going into Russia in the winter, Alexander the Great going into India. So it'll be in the top 5 historical blunders of all time. Meanwhile, for one of the smartest people I've ever, not that I met him, but I've ever met on YouTube, and just a remarkable person, he just outsmarted himself, saw the opportunity, and didn't grasp the enormity of the risks that came his way. So let me just conclude with some implications for Russia, the US, China, Iran, Israel, and the EU and Germany. For Russia, this is an unmitigated disaster. It's a disaster for Russia. It's a disaster for a superpower, because when you're a superpower, you don't actually want to use your weapons. You want to just pretend that you're going to use your weapons so that other countries will listen to you. Well, after this debacle, no one's afraid of Russia. And by the way, the same thing happened to America. After Afghanistan, no one's afraid of America. So both superpowers have lost their superpower status because of the gross mismanagement of the military and the political leaders above them. And relative to Russia, it's also a personal disaster for Putin. He basically destroyed his image in history, and leaders, I'm told, want to know how history will regard them. And he just went from a great leader, a strong leader, a smart leader, a modern day czar, so to speak, to being a war criminal, and basically threw away his reputation. So just a disaster all around for Russia and Putin personally. For the US, we could have stopped this, should have stopped this. There's no reason for this war. There was some, like any war, there's some compromise solution. America could have played some role in that. Russia had some legitimate fears of NATO coming into the Ukraine. He could have been assured against that would not happen. So Ukraine shouldn't have been threatening to Russia, and he shouldn't have been felt forced to take over. So in terms of foreign policy, our foreign policy establishment, State Department, National Security, has no foreign policy credibility anymore. I mean, they lost it in Afghanistan. This just compounds it. And it's time to basically replace the whole foreign policy team of the administration. This will be a challenge, obviously, for our economy. Higher energy prices, higher inflation. But I come from the corporate world, and America's corporations are very strong, run by very smart people. They have lots of money and lots of abilities to adapt to challenges. I saw this during COVID. COVID was about as big a body blow as you ever get, either to an individual or to a corporation. And after 3 months of digesting the enormity of the problem, one by one, every company that I monitor rose to the challenge. And so corporate America, I don't worry too much about them. They will figure it out. And for China, if you had asked me a month ago, will China try to take over Taiwan this year? I would have told you 75% chance, yes. Now I'll tell you 25% chance, yes. As China watches Russia get bogged down and destroy its credibility, its reputation, watch Putin become, in quotes, a war criminal, China's desire to take over Taiwan, I think, is plummeting. Not that they don't want Taiwan, they do, but they don't want to get into weeks and weeks and months battle, killing their fellow Chinese, often relatives or friends. And they don't want to get knocked out of the SWIFT system. They don't want to have an embargo on their exports, which are like 50% of their GDP. So I think this is very good news for Taiwan and bad news for a bully like China. Relative to Iran, this is good news because Iran has oil and natural gas that are embargoed, and the administration seems to want to get them out of that embargo status and sign or agree to a new Iran deal known as the JCPOA. And so from their point of view, their bargaining position's going up as they have the ability to sell a lot of oil and natural gas if they were allowed to. So this mess is good for Iran. And relative to Israel, it's bad for Israel, because anything that's good for Iran is bad for Israel. And if America signs a JCPOA and sends them billions of relief, plus the ability to sell oil and natural gas, Iran will take most of the money, as they do, and put it into their 3 terror organizations. Iran is the largest terror organization in the world. They have a physical terror organization, a narco-terror organization, and a political or cultural terror organization, with a total of about 400,000 worldwide terrorists. It's 10 times the size of Al Qaeda or ISIS. So if Iran's able to get the resources to refuel its 3 terror arms, that's bad news for Israel, and will put extra pressure on Israel. Also, Israel has the same problem now of every American ally, that no American ally can trust America in any way to defend them anyhow, being weapons. And finally, relative to the EU and Germany, this will ultimately be good news. This is a wake-up call to knock the EU and Germany out of their la-la land of false narratives. They were all dismantling over the past 20 years their energy industry and relying on wind and solar, even getting rid of their nuclear power plants, particularly Germany was, relying more and more on Russia, which turned out to be a blackmail situation against them. So EU and Germany, I call this a positive because it's a wake-up call, and will cause them to start running their countries properly, stop depending on the US for everything, and become much more internally reliant on themselves, both for military and for energy needs. So let me stop here, and let's just, Marshall, let's go back to the European map for 1 minute, and then I'll take some questions. So this is the mess that European leaders face. I showed it to you a few minutes ago, but let me just mention a few things. Let's, in 2 minutes, look at the 10 challenges facing Europe. And it also shows you the depth of the mismanagement in Europe of their various countries. The number 1 challenge facing the EU is the EU. The European Union is a confederation of 27 democracies. They make decisions by consensus. It's not so easy to get 27 countries to agree on anything. And but one thing they all failed at is protecting their cultural identity. Europe is 90% Christian, and they're being invaded by the Muslims. And the Muslim invasion is threatening the foundations of the Christian countries, because the Muslims are coming there to take over. They're not coming there to get a job. And so some are, of course, coming, and some are coming just for benefits, but some are also coming as the vanguard to take over Europe. And it's reminiscent of all the fights that Europe had throughout the Middle Ages, protecting itself from Muslim invasion. In fact, Spain had been invaded by the Muslims until the Catholics in Spain threw them out about 500 years ago. So the number 2, Europe has to protect itself from Russia, North Korea, and Iranian nuclear weapons versus NATO underfunding, where NATO doesn't have tactical nuclear weapons and allowed Putin to blackmail them because they have strategic weapons to blow up Moscow, but not tactical weapons to use in the battlefield. Number 3, Europe, like America, by the way, does not understand political Islam or Islamism, and it's being invaded by the Muslim Brotherhood, Iran, Shiite Muslim invasion, the Sunni Muslim invasion, the Islamist warrior invasion, foreign mosques. Turkey has built thousands of mosques throughout Europe. Europe never should have allowed that to take place. They're being invaded by African Muslims. And so basically, Europe's in a state of invasion. By the way, so is America. America's undergoing a full-scale invasion right now by 130 countries, at least 2.5 million people a year, and I hear it could be 5 million a year. So both the U.S. and Europe are fighting an existential risk as we're being invaded by all of our enemies. Number 9, Russia's very good at what's called active measures, where they actually get involved in the democracies and undermine them. They've done this in the schools. The K through 12 in the universities are basically taken over by KGB agents, and also climate warming. I can't prove this, but I'll guess that it was the work of the KGB to convince Americans and Europeans that carbon dioxide and carbon are such an existential threat that we have to get rid of them in 10, 20, 30 years. And therefore we underinvested in our oil and natural gas and coal, and therefore made us vulnerable to having shortages, and therefore gave the power of balance to Russia and to be blackmailed at times like this. So I think the whole climate change hysteria was a KGB disinformation campaign, which the American and European governments fell for. And in terms of cyber, China, Russia, Iran are attacking all of us all the time with cyber abilities. So this is the mess that they face in Europe. And just to summarize, the only good news here is Europe now knows that it has a mess. It now knows that it can't count on America for anything. It now knows that Russia is an enemy. And it now knows that it's on its own, and it's either going to fix its problems or it's going to die. I think at times like this, democracies will fix their problems and not die. And so that's why this silver lining, so to speak, is Europe may survive where it was on its way to die. So let me stop here and let's see what people want to talk about. You can take the slide off, Marcia.
Okay, we'll take the slide off for now. All right, please enter your questions. Today is a quiet day on the question front, but we do have a couple here. First, we're going to go with Phil has a question. Ken, you've prompted numerous questions. I'll ask you to comment on Naftali Bennett's offer to mediate the Ukraine invasion.
Well, I think that was a big mistake. I think it's always wonderful when countries offer to try to play a mediation role. And Prime Minister Bennett is friendly with Zelensky, friendly with Putin. And ordinarily would be a potential intermediary, because I don't like people getting killed. I don't think people should have gotten killed. I think this all should have gotten resolved without anyone getting killed. So, however, when you are going to negotiate and play the role of an intermediary, you want to succeed. So Bennett and his people should have a deal, not a 100% deal, but an understanding. Let's just say there's 8 issues. They should have had some understanding with Ukraine and Russia on those 8 issues, and then come to Russia when the deal's like 70% complete, and maybe help the final 30. But you don't, when you have no understanding and agreement between Russia and Ukraine on anything, and you just show up as a fishing expedition, you know, here I am, and can I help? You have a 99% chance of failing, and I would have only showed up if I had a 75% chance of succeeding. So I think it was a noble idea, but a mistake for Israel to get involved without having done the legwork beforehand.
Okay, moving on. From Julie, how do you think this entire disaster will end or resolve? Is there any exit strategy at this point for Putin that he would accept?
I think no matter what happens, Putin's finished. I would be shocked if he survives the rest of the year. The disaster that he caused Russia, the disaster that he caused the image of Russia, the disaster that he caused to himself, going from a great, smart leader to being a war criminal, to an economy that's dying, GDP falling 10% a year for 3 years. I think what will also do Putin in is in America, when your dies in the course of protecting our country, there is elaborate ceremonies. The casket comes back. It's sad, but it comes back draped with a flag. You go to the military ceremony, a burial. It's tragedy beyond belief, but at least there's dignity, so to speak, to the fallen soldier and to the families. How would you like to be a Russian family and you get a letter in the mail? Oh, your son Igor died somewhere, somehow. We're not sure. He and his 122 comrades were cremated somewhere, somehow. And we just want to send you this letter thanking you for your contribution to Russian society. They're going to hit the roof. Can you imagine getting 10, 20, 30,000 letters like that? From their, and they were getting letters or calls from their son saying, "Oh, I'm just in a training exercise in Belarus. Everything's fine, no problem." And then they find out they're in a war, and the Ukrainians are shooting at them, and they're dead. So I think the parents are going to hit the roof. I think the oligarchs are going to hit the roof. Can you imagine? Just pretend you're an oligarch. You had no money. But you're friends of Putin. He gave you the franchise for, let's just say, aluminum. You now have $18 billion. And now your money's frozen and you're back to where you were. You have zero. I mean, your bank account says $18 billion, but you can't have access to any of that. I think you're going to hit the roof. So, and the military leaders that now look so stupid and incompetent, they're going to hit the roof. So I think when all these people hit the roof over the next few months, that'll be the end of Putin. I hope he lives. I never want anyone dead, but politically he's dead, and he should work out a compromise solution to get out of this mess. Otherwise, if he just plows through with his current strategy, basically see how many people I can kill in the Ukraine, see how many people I can push out of the Ukraine, see how much destruction I can cause to the Ukraine. And so whoever's left will accept me. And then I'll just take all the minerals, wheat, natural gas in the Black Sea that I can find, and I'll just use it as a big gas station, so to speak. And I don't care what the remaining people think. And if they think too much, I'll just blow them up. I don't regard that as a victory. But that could happen, but then he'll be overthrown. I don't think the Russian society will tolerate 3, 6, 9, 12 months of a quagmire while he basically tries to kill everyone in the country. I don't think he'll survive the year in power.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for your participation. I see a lot more of you have chimed in. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Ken. I do not believe Europe will survive. In addition to low birth rate, they have lost their interest in Christianity for leftism, and the inflection point of the Muslim invasion has passed. How do you think Europe can survive with this scenario?
That's a very good question. It's one of the reasons I wrote a book called The Multi-Front War. It's that countries have to fight numerous wars at the same time, and democracies don't know how to fight wars. So democracies are fighting 3 wars at the same time. I call them the war with the reds, the greens, and the blues. The reds are the communists, or the socialists, or the leftists, or the progressives, which I call regressives. That's one form of warfare. The greens are the Islamists. That would be Iran. On the Shiite side, Turkey, Qatar. on the Sunni side, and they're fighting the blues, which are the globalists, the United Nations, the global corporations like Facebook, Twitter, Google. And so these three, the reds, the greens, and the blues, have declared war, basically, on people who are normal, on the normal citizen. And I call this World War III. So we're in World War III right now. Sometimes people say to me, how long's the war been going on? The war with the Reds has been going on 100 years, since Vladimir Lenin and his criminals illegally took control over Russia in 1917. So that war, in round numbers, is 100-year-old. The war with the Greens is roughly 1,400 years, since Muhammad and his followers made the decision to take over the world, and they ended up taking over about a third of the world at that time. And the war with the blues had been going on for 100 years with the League of Nations, which then morphed into the United Nations. So this World War III has actually been going on for a long time. Two elements for 100 years, one element for 1,400 years. Europe has no clue how to handle either of those three wars, and it has no clue how to handle the three wars simultaneously. By the way, in Europe's defense, America has no clue how to handle those three wars and how to handle them simultaneously. And I hate to say this, but neither the Biden administration nor the Trump administration had any clue how to manage the three wars. The basic problem I'm getting to is democracies don't want to hear about wars. Democracies want to hear about peacetime, about jobs, about money, about investments, children, grandchildren, vacations. They don't want to think about wars. The bad guys think about wars all the time. So your point is very well taken. In Europe, the Christian population is producing roughly 1.5 babies. The Muslim population is producing 3 or 4 babies. And the Muslims are, in round numbers, 10% of Europe. And when you flow out the differential growth rates of the Muslims at 10%, but growing 3% a year, and the Christians at 90%, but declining 1% a year. You do that for 30 years. I did it with my little calculator, and by 2050, the Muslims will be 30% of Europe. Well, if you do it for another 2 generations, another 50 years, the Muslims will be the majority of Europe. So Europe is facing an existential risk, but I guess I'll still say that this was a wake-up call. It hopefully brings a higher quality of manager, higher quality of politician into the system, so that they start thinking for themselves, and they're certainly not going to expect America to bail them out of anything. And so their chances of survival are higher now than they were 2 weeks ago. Let's put it that way.
Okay, we have a question from Ken. Russia took itself off the grid for nuclear monitoring. What is the chance he will cause another Chernobyl nuclear disaster?
Well, I think that we have a few nuclear disasters to worry about. One is Russia and one is Iran. Putin, the Russians have this theory, as enunciated in the internet, TV, and elsewhere, of using nuclear weapons earlier than later in order to create a shock and awe effect. Whereas we don't think that way. We use nuclear weapons as the last resort. They have a theory, which is not illogical, that if you're fighting someone, scare the living bejeebies out of them on day 1, so that you can maybe negotiate with them on day 2, but only after they're scared. So, I mean, just for look what we did in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. We didn't know how to negotiate with the Japanese. The Japanese, you couldn't negotiate with them. We would have had to invade Japan, which we didn't want to do. 2 nuclear weapons, and they surrender unconditionally. So maybe Putin was saying to himself, I'll find an area in Ukraine where not many people live. I have a very small nuclear weapon. smaller than Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and I'll blow it off just for effect to scare everybody in the Ukraine, get their attention. If it doesn't work, I'll wait 1 week and another one, and then say, now I want unconditional surrender. So maybe that's what he thought he was going to do in the beginning. But now that he's become a war criminal, if he blows off 2 nuclear weapons, he can become a war criminal in jail or imprisoned and or shot. So I think as strong as determined as he is to win, my guess is he won't pull the stunt of using 2 small yield nuclear weapons. So I think the chances of that have gone down given the disastrousness of his military. Meanwhile, the administration seems intent on letting Iran have nuclear weapons with a delay of a few years. And if you think Putin's crazy, Iran is a professional criminal organization run by wall-to-wall crazies. And so this would be the first time a professional terror organization had their hands on nuclear weapons. So I'm worried about Russian nukes, but I'm more worried about Iranian nukes. What else do we have?
Okay, we have, why did the US disallow the Middle East natural gas pipe owned by Israel to carry gas to Europe?
The natural gas pipeline from Israel was supposed to go from Israel to Cyprus to Greece to Europe. As everyone knows, Cyprus and Greece and Europe are Christian countries. So if you look at it in religious terms, it was a Jewish-Christian joint venture. The Muslims, in particular Turkey, wanted the pipeline going through them, and so that they would get the fees. They would get. Turkey also needs natural gas. Turkey is not energy self-sufficient, so Turkey wanted it for both economic reasons. Plus, they wanted to get the transit fees, and they wanted to. Then it would go to the Christians, so to speak. But with Turkey as the intermediary, it would give Turkey extra power over the Europeans, extra leverage. Well, needless to say, Israel, Cyprus, and Greece, and the Europeans didn't like that idea. And so the question is, why did the administration like the idea? Well, the administration, I hate to say this, is basically run by the Reds, the Greens, and the Blues. So the green elements, the Islamist elements within the administration said, let's include Muslim Turkey in this pipeline. And so that's why the US basically switched its support from a Jewish Christian pipeline to a Jewish Turkish Muslim Brotherhood Islamist pipeline, which mistake. And hopefully Israel, Cyprus, and Greece basically say to the US, go jump in a big lake of your choice where you don't tell us where to put our pipeline. That's what those countries should say. What else?
Okay, we're coming to the end of the questions here. Can you comment on how this war will affect or could affect the midterm elections?
Well, remember I mentioned this is the beginning of the end of Putin. This tragic mistake that he made. As smart as he was, as I said, he outsmarted himself. So this is the beginning of the end of Putin. Now, in watching the Democrats, in particular the Biden administration, mismanage our energy independence, mismanage the Keystone Pipeline, mismanage the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, mismanage the brewing war in the Ukraine, mismanage Afghanistan, I think this is the beginning of the end of the Democrat Party. Just as I haven't seen people like Putin make mistakes of this magnitude in history, maybe top 5 mistakes in history. This would also be one of the top 5 political mistakes ever made by a political party in history. So on TV, I've heard different speakers like Minority Leader McCarthy saying that they'll pick up 20 to 35 seats. Newt Gingrich said 30 to 50 seats. I've heard other people say as high as 70 seats. So in the Senate, people are talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seats. So in either case, this is almost a death knell for the Democrat Party. I don't know if they'll ever recover. Now, the Republicans are not the best managed party in the history of parties either. So maybe the Republicans can mess it up. But if properly managed, the Republican Party would decimate the Democrat Party and almost make it unrecognizable as a force. Now, political force. Now, I saw this in England. In England, I forget exactly, but maybe 5 years ago, they had a Labour Party run by Jeremy Corbyn, who was a professional anti-Semite, racist. Never should have been allowed to have a party, should have been allowed to run in democracy. Just like I don't think we should have someone in the Ku Klux Klan or the Nazi Party run for Senate. I don't think you should have a professional racist anti-Semite like Corbyn. Anyways, no one stopped him. He ran, he got decimated, destroyed, annihilated by Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party. So Corbyn set up the demise of the Labour Party, and right now Biden and his people are setting up the demise of the Democrat Party. And by the way, there's two Democrat parties. There's the Communist Socialist Party, which I don't think should be allowed to run. And then there's the Liberal Party, which I call normal Democrats, which obviously do have a right to run. If this ends up destroying the progressive wing, and the Democrats come back as a JFK, Scoop Jackson party, and they learn their lesson, then it would be helpful in healing process. So that would be the only hope for the Democrat Party, is to purge the communists, Islamists, globalists, anti-American people who do not believe in the Constitution, Bill of Rights. I don't think should be able to run. Maybe they'll all get defeated, and then the Democrat Party will come back as a normal Democrat Party rather than a communist Democrat Party.
Okay, we've come to the end of our questions. It's 10 minutes till the hour. And I think that unless anybody wants to chime in here last minute, I think that we're at the end. Unless
Marcia, in the last minute or so, unless someone comes up with a question, just remind everybody about our seminar coming up and then our webinar coming up.
Okay, so the webinar is March 27th, and that's in Boca Raton. And if you're anywhere in the area, we'd love to have you join us in person. Our next Ask the Chairman Anything webinar, we happen once a month, and the next one is April 7th, Thursday, April 7th. It'll be at 4 p.m. So look for your invite for that one as well. And thank you everyone for your participation and for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Marcia, for doing such a great job organizing everybody for listening in.
Okay. Thank you for joining. Bye-bye now.